Up to 52.
So as we get ready to start, we're going to start it in about a minute. Please make sure that you go on mute for the time being. And also make sure that you rename yourself with your first and last name for attendance purposes. If you are not able to do that, please ask one of our co-hosts and we'll be glad to help you with that. So the other thing I want to say before we start is that this is going to be a long meeting. We have 10 of our candidates who have joined us. And so please take your stretch breaks as needed. We probably will be going past 11. And we do, I do want you to take out your agenda and add one additional candidate. Senator Judith Zaffirini contacted me last night. And so Senator Zaffirini will be joining us in a little while and will be speaking for Senate District 21 along with Frank Pomeroy. So please update your agenda with that. And at this point, it is 9:45. And so I am calling the October regular meeting of the Austin Retired Teachers Association to order. And right now, good morning to everyone. My name is Joe Ramirez. I am the president for ARTA for 2020 to 2022. And I want to welcome all of you here. And we are very privileged to have candidates who are running for political office at the state Senate level. They will be speaking with us throughout the morning. And in addition to that, we will have a short business meeting after the forum. So please stay with us after the forum because we do have a couple of important things that need to be covered in our business meeting. So I am going to go ahead and do a share screen real quickly. And I will pause this after I do some introductions. But again, welcome everyone. And I am very excited as we go ahead and begin our regular meeting. And we are zooming into new frontiers again because this is, I believe, the largest legislative forum that the Austin Retired Teachers Association has ever had. And so again, for those of you who just checked in late, or who just checked in, not late, excuse me, please update your agenda to make sure that Senator Judith Zaffirini is included in our speaker section. I was contacted yesterday evening, and Craig will also share her responses to the summary or to the questions that came in. I want to go ahead and turn this over in a few seconds to Rudy Munguia. And you know, when I was in school, I always found it exciting when the teacher would ask someone to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And so one of the things I would like to start as a tradition under my presidency is to call for volunteers each month to lead us in the pledges of allegiance to the US and Texas flags. We already have the November leaders to do this, but if anyone is interested in December through May, please contact me and we can do one person for the US, one person for the Texas, or one person to do both. So at this point, the other thing I'm going to ask you to do is to stay on mute. The only person who's going to be unmuted is Rudy. And this way we will go ahead and have a little bit of decorum and we won't be all over the place when it comes to the pledge. So Rudy, I am going on mute and I am going to ask you to go ahead and lead us. And thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Joe. And if we are ready, I don't know if as you're able to stand, first of all, Joe, let me be sure, can you hear me? Joe, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I.
All right. Okay. I just want to be sure. If you will please stand, we will begin our pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now, the Texas flag. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you, Rudy. Really appreciate it. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and let me just get this back up. I'm turning this over to Craig Campbell. Before I do that, if you're looking at your screen and you want to see more of the PowerPoint and not the gallery of speakers, if you look at the box there where all the speakers are, go to the second button from the left, and that will just focus on the speaker himself. And once the speaker begins, I can do the speaker highlights, so they'll show up. So Craig, I'm turning it over to you, and I'll get back on at the end of the forum.
Okay, my name is Craig Campbell. I'm the legislative chair for ARTA. In my first meeting with President Rosemary Morrow and President-elect Joe Ramirez about this position last February, they raised the idea of having a candidate forum for our members. We had no idea what obstacles lay ahead, but the legislative committee has worked tirelessly on this. As an organization, we do not endorse candidates. We make our needs, possible solutions clear, and we ask candidates to respond and or endorse our ideas. After the election, we will follow up with whoever is elected with these same ideas, other issues, and to provide our analysis of any legislation that impacts us. To this end, we also have conducted a written survey of all the candidates. We have provided the results to our members and published on our ARTA webpage. And can you share the screen with me, Joe? And I'll put this is the executive summary of our survey results. And as you can see, these are the questions and items that we have asked them to respond to. There's also some narrative in the fuller report. So that's available to all members and has been provided to them. So we have invited all candidates to complete the survey and to participate in the forum from all parties for House Districts 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, and 136, and Senate Districts 14, 21, 24, and 25. One House District and 2 Senate Districts do not have races this November. But we provided each candidate with the recently adopted RTA policy positions and the ARTA survey, so our interests are well known. We realize that this time of year is very busy for candidates and they may have other events to attend. 2 of the 10 people scheduled today will be joining us late because they are participating in another forum in Williamson County. The 10 individuals that we have scheduled include 7 incumbents, 3 challengers. There are 8 Democrats, 1 Republican, 1 Libertarian. We have received some questions from members, and we may be able to include more from entries into the chat section of Zoom. With 10 persons scheduled, we have a limited amount of time. Our timekeeper will be a former middle school teacher. We are very pleased and appreciative that this forum will be led by Claire McInerny, the distinguished education reporter for KUT News. Claire McInerny is the education reporter for KUT, and previously she has worked as statewide education reporter for NPR member stations in Indiana. She won an Edward R. Murrow Award for a series she did there about resources for English education learners in the state rural school districts. Claire is originally from Kansas and earned a journalism degree from the University of Kansas. Since moving to Texas, she has never missed winter. Now, let me turn this over to Claire McInerny from KUT News.
Hello, everybody. So as Craig said, I personally would love to get as many of your questions in as possible. So please,
the video on.
please put them in the chat, and I will definitely prioritize those. And then Craig and Joe, please interrupt me if I'm going in the wrong order or anything. So let's get started, and we are starting with Vicki Goodwin, correct?
Yes.
All right.
Get on speaker view.
Hi there.
Okay, good. Hello. It's so hard. I'm sorry. Thank you for joining us. So we're going to start with you. You are running to keep your seat. Tell us a little bit, like this group, as we know, are all retired teachers in the TRS system. And a major concern that I think we want to hear from all candidates is your thoughts on increasing contributions to the TRS fund, how healthcare and benefits are working now. And so as someone who's been in the legislature already and seeing how that works, tell me your position on improving benefits for retired teachers, and how possible you think that is going forward and what you can do to contribute to that.
Sure, absolutely. Well, gosh, last session, our big bill was House Bill 3 and putting more money into our public schools, which was wonderful. I was so happy to be involved with that. That was one of the reasons that I ran for office. We also gave our retired teachers an extra paycheck, which I was really happy about that. This session, we are going to have a really tough budget. And so we have to keep that promise to our school in House Bill 3 and continuing that funding and not cutting, which is going to be a tough thing. So we know we're seeing a decrease in our sales taxes. We saw a decrease in the oil and tax revenues coming in. So it's going to be tough, but I am there to fight for teachers and retired teachers. And we will find a way to get some money in, to make those contributions to keep the room solvent. Another really big issue that we have in front of us is healthcare. And I know that all of us pay more and more for our health insurance every single year, and we get fewer benefits from it, it seems. We just had a press conference yesterday on expanding Medicaid, and what that would do is bring a lot of federal dollars back to Texas. We have the highest rate of uninsured, and while we may have private insurance and the teachers are in their own health insurance plans, the fact that so many people are uninsured and they aren't able to go see a primary doctor means they end up in the emergency room too often, where the cost is much higher, and we all end up paying for that. And so expanding Medicaid would help not just those that would be enrolled in Medicaid, it helps all of us.
And can you dig a little bit more into expanding Medicaid in terms of the age? Because I know sometimes if you retire before you qualify, then that's kind of the problem in terms of the gap. Am I wrong in that? If you guys expanded it out, like would it reach people who retired earlier before they qualified for Medicaid?
Right. It could certainly, anyone who falls in the gap. So if they're not able to purchase health insurance on their own or through an employer and they fit the guidelines, that's what it's intended for, so that we can have everybody insured. You know, another issue is kids and Medicaid. The CHIP program had been doing a really good job of insuring kids so that they could go see doctors on a regular basis for preventive care. But really, it's intended so that anyone can go see primary doctors and get their healthcare needs taken care of.
So you were part of the group. Oh, sorry, I'm on mute. Okay. You were part of the group of legislators that was working on House Bill 3, as you said, which was, a huge push forward in school funding. And as we know this year, just money is going to be tight. And schools are also doing a lot more right now. And so how are you planning to make sure that we can either like increase funding to schools to make sure like staff is retained and paid and all of that, and keep kids educated? And are you seeing any roadblocks already before the session has started?
Well, the roadblocks I would say is that the governor, comptroller have asked for every state agency to look at where they can cut, so that we're already going in with a mentality of we've got to cut. There's a House Democratic Caucus that's been working on loopholes or exemptions to our tax system and ways that we can improve that and find some other revenue sources. We're very reliant on the gas tax revenues, the oil and gas rather, and we need to start rethinking where our revenue is coming from. So that group, that caucus has been working on some ideas, and they've come up with a number of them. I really hate to throw out specific ones because anytime you mention a tax, somebody's not going to like it, right? But if we put it all out there on the table when we start talking about our plan, I think that there are certainly some ways that we can bring in revenue. The idea, I always tell people, the idea behind it is to be as fair as possible, because we know we need to have these government services. We know that we need to have a strong education system and a strong healthcare system. You know, our economy in Texas has been really wonderful over the past years, but it relies on having healthy, well-educated people to be our workers and to be our consumers. And so it's something that we have to do. You know, we have to find the revenue to support these government services. And there is a way to do that.
We have a question in the chat. What do you think the chances are of getting Medicaid expanded, given that Governor Abbott has not been in favor of doing that previously?
I think that this pandemic is showing that it's something we have to do. You know, more and more people, as they are losing their jobs, are losing their employer-sponsored health insurance. So we're going to see an even larger number of Texans uninsured. And so particularly at this time, it's so important. What are we going to do when a vaccine comes out? Are we going to allow everybody to have a free vaccination, or are we going to require insurance? That's one of the big questions in front of us. We've also, for many years, been dealing with the high maternal mortality rate, and we've been trying to expand Medicaid to cover a woman beyond the 60 days that she's now covered after giving birth, because 56% of women die beyond that time frame. So there's a lot of really important reasons for expanding Medicaid, and I think as more and more people speak up about it, and even if we let our public officials know that that's why we're going to the ballot box, that makes all the difference in the world. That's why we got House Bill 3 passed, is because that message was sent. When voters went to the ballot box, they were voting for public education. This time, I think when voters are going to the ballot box, they're voting for healthcare.
And one thing I know, let's see, we have another one. Oh, never mind. One thing I know, like journalists, like my colleagues who cover politics are really looking at is the possibility that the House and the state legislature could go Democrat this fall for a variety of reasons. And if that happened, like, what do you think as a Democrat you'd be able to do differently than this past session within the structure of just the House?
Well, absolutely. If we have a Democratic-led House, I believe we'll get Medicaid through. We will get Medicaid through the House. And so then it will just be reliant upon the governor to listen to the people of the state of Texas. You know, we saw recently Oklahoma and a couple of other states expand Medicaid through referendums. We don't have that ability in Texas, but I think if you take a poll of the people in Texas, you'll see that the majority want to expand Medicaid so that we're not seen as the state with the highest uninsured rate, so that we're not seen as the state with the highest maternal mortality rate, so that we're seen as taking care of our people. You know, that's the bottom line. Do we want to take care of our people in a way that allows us to continue with the great state and the great economy that we have?
How are we doing on time, Craig? Okay, I'll ask another question. They'll interrupt me when I run out of time. And so, sorry, I have so many notes everywhere. One thing that I don't know if this is something that's on legislators' minds, but as a reporter, I've been spending the last couple months talking with current teachers about going back to the classroom and just like this very unprecedented time of like, do I feel comfortable or not? And what's being mandated and not. Is this something you want to, you know, but then again with state laws, like striking isn't really an option for teachers. So they kind of have to work within their system of like, how do I feel comfortable? Is this something that has been on your mind as a legislator going into this session of like, do we like protecting current teachers or giving them different powers? Or is this kind of seen as this is just a very crazy one-off situation in terms of the pandemic?
It is a really tough time for teachers, and every district has handled it a little bit differently. So I really feel like the legislature's role is to step back and let the different school districts handle it in the way that works best for them with their county public health authority. I know I've been talking to the superintendents of the various school districts within my house district, and they are, like I said, all handling it a little bit differently. But one of the issues that came up in the Leander School District is that it covers both Williamson and Travis County. And so when they had a sixth grader who became sick, who tested positive for COVID, the superintendent reached out to both public health authorities, and they had different ways of handling it. The Williamson County Public Health Authority said all sixth graders should stay home, including the teachers, and quarantine for the 2 weeks. Whereas Travis County said, just, you need to do the testing, tracing, isolation, but just those students that came in contact with this particular one who tested positive. So it's such a complicated issue. I think that for the legislature to try to say, here's how you handle it for every school district would be very challenging. So I think that's why I think local control is important.
Great. Thank you, Representative Goodwin. That is time for this round. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay, so next up, we're going to speak with Representative Donna Howard. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yay, there you are. Perfect. So again, I want to start with kind of a general question, then we'll drill into benefits for retired teachers who are in the TRS system. And so tell me your point of view in terms of funding the TRS system and the contributions, and then I'll ask a few more specific questions. How have you been involved with that, and how are you looking at that going forward?
Well, first I would say that I view the pension plan as deferred compensation, as a promise that's been made and that needs to be honored. And so I am very committed to making sure that we continue to approach this as something that we have essentially said to teachers, we'll defer some compensation. We're going to make sure we give you something later so you can actually live, have a living distribution here. And we have been not as good at following through on that as we should have been. Last session, we made some progress, and Trent Ashby, who kind of took the lead on Senate Bill 12 in the House, was able to help us get some good bipartisan support and get that through. It made it all the way, and it begins to increase the state's contribution to the plan. Also, other contributions from the school districts and active employees, but the biggest thing that I'm concerned about is that the state participate as the partner that it needs to be in this. And so I'm very pleased about what we were able to do last time. Now we need to make sure we keep funding it and keep moving forward. And part of the challenge, of course, is that we have had COVID and we have had a disruption of our economy. My understanding from looking at the last thing that I saw about the TRS fund is that it has absolutely lost several $billions, but that it is still doing well and that there shouldn't be any disruption in what retirees are receiving. But we need to make sure that we're following through and finding the revenue to continue our investments. And, you know, one of the things that I had proposed before, and I know I've talked with this group about it, was I was hoping that we were going to be able to take some portion of the rainy day fund, the economic stabilization fund, and invest that in a corpus that would be then spin off new money that we could use to take care of our underfunded liabilities, including our pensions. I still think that's a good idea. And we tried to get somewhere toward that last time, but the problem now is that we are going to have a shortfall in our overall budget. So it's going to make it more difficult to do something like that, because we're more than likely going to have to use a significant portion of the economic stabilization fund to help us. So I'm rambling on here a bit, I realize. And so, you know, stop me if you want to talk about this in a little different way, but as a member of appropriations, this is the part I focus on so much.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Yeah, as a member of the Appropriations Committee, kind of knowing the reality. I mean, as you were saying, House Bill 3 was a huge deal last year, but it didn't flood schools with money, you know, and so I think expectation management is interesting too, going into this next session. So as a member of the Appropriations Committee, tell us a little bit about, you know, what do you think the priorities are going to be? You know, a lot of people were talking about the rainy day fund saying, this isn't a rainy day, COVID, I don't know what is, but there's still so much discussion. So kind of talk me through what you think with your committee, the priorities are going to be, and where education and retired teachers fall in that.
Well, I will tell you that there's hardly a legislator or a candidate I've ever heard from who doesn't say that they support retired teachers. So we need to hold people accountable to what they say. That being said, yes, we ended last session. We left last session having passed a 2-year budget that had a $3 billion surplus. And then the pandemic hit, oil prices dropped. We ended up having a revised revenue estimate from the comptroller a couple of months back in the summer, and went from a $3 billion surplus to a $4.6 billion shortfall, which is obviously going to be challenging. At the same time, I'm going to push back on the narrative that we have to cut to make this work. We do have some cushions. The Economic Stabilization Fund is one of them. We also have some accounting mechanisms of deferrals and so forth that we could do. And we're looking at additional revenue sources, many of which would not even involve new taxes. It would be looking at some loopholes, but we can get into the revenue options if y'all want to do that. But the bottom line is, yes, it's going to be a challenge. And we're going to have to look at what can we do to maintain, to cover the costs of the current 2-year biennium, but also look at how we're going to move forward with the next 2-year biennium and make sure that we're continuing to invest in these promises that we've made with the TRS fund, so that we can continue to work toward actuarial soundness, which has been jeopardized a bit by the pandemic. So, you know, I would say it's going to be a high priority. I think that when I hear my colleagues speak about this, especially the Democrats, but I also hear it from some Republicans too, preserving the gains that we made last time is going to be extremely important. We worked really hard to get that bipartisan support to move things forward. The thought of going backwards after we made those gains, I don't think is something that anybody wants to see happen. And you know, the governor, lieutenant governor, and Speaker of the House have asked for a 5% reduction. The TEA's proposal does not look at their formulas, but it does look at some of the programs that were in HB3. And so we're going to need to look at that. But again, let me just riff off of that for a second to say that it's very difficult for legislators right now because we haven't been able to meet. We haven't been able to have interim hearings where we typically have opportunities to ask questions and delve into what all's going on. So by this time, before last session, we would have already had some appropriations hearings where we would have been talking with the TRS people and knowing where things are and what needs to be done. We're not doing that now. We are really at an information gap because we haven't had the opportunity to have these hearings. It's been very frustrating. We're doing the best we can to try to seek information, but you know, it's been a real challenge. So I think we're going to go into this session with less information than we normally have, with less analysis. It's going to require a real significant effort on the part of legislators to get up to speed, to be able to know what we need to do. But you know, I don't doubt that we can find opportunities here to move forward with covering the current year's budget shortfall and also continuing the investments that we have made through HB3 and SB12 in the next 2-year cycle. It's just going to require that legislators roll up their sleeves and do some work and don't just immediately go to the cutting board. We do have other options that we should be looking at.
And when it comes to healthcare, what are your thoughts and your positions on expanding Medicaid or adjusting the healthcare plans that retired teachers get to utilize through the state?
Yeah, well, I know that we already heard from Vicki about the expansion of Medicaid, and we're all the Democrats anyway are on board with that. And I know that a lot of my Republican colleagues talk about it. How can we make this palatable? Because it's been such a divisive issue politically. But the fact is, especially in our rural areas, we've had rural hospitals closed down. And with COVID, we've had very difficult situations in access to care, a lot of which has to do with the fact that we have been relying on our local communities and the so-called 1115 waiver to cover the costs of uncompensated care. And it's not able to do it to the extent that expanding Medicaid would do. So, you know, clearly we are leaving what has been told to us, approximately $10 billion of federal funds on the table each year that we could be bringing in to help cover the cost. And it's a 9-to-1 match. Yes, it would cost the state. It would indeed cost the state. But there are ways that that could be done, as other states have done, where it hasn't actually taken away from any of their other programs. We could get into the weeds a bit, but it has to do with some cost sharing with local communities who no longer would have to be having as high property taxes because they wouldn't be the ones having to provide the services anymore. The state would be covering the cost. And I'll tell you, with the pandemic, the number that I've heard is that before COVID, about 18% of Texans were uninsured. It's now jumped up to something like 29%.
Yeah.
A significant impact. And we have got to figure out a way to get more people covered. I don't care what people say about Medicaid not being the greatest system. There's actually mixed reviews about that. There's a lot of good that Medicaid does, but I can tell you that if you don't have access to care, you're not going to get care. So.
All right. Thank you. Was that bell the time? Was that correct, Craig? Okay. Cool. Thank you so much, Representative Howard. We appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so next we have Kenneth Moore, correct? Are you here? Is Kenneth Moore here?
Yes.
Hello, hi, thank you for joining us.
Waving my hand, yes.
It's like you look around, I just see the same things. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
So you are running for Representative Hinojos's seat, and tell us a little bit about what we want to get to know you since you haven't been in this position. So tell us what got you into this race, and this is a room of educators and former educators and people who work in education. So we are all particularly interested in your stance on those things. So let's hear a little bit of introduction. What is your background with public schools here in Texas?
I am proud to be the only libertarian appearing before you today, the only candidate for Texas House District 49 appearing before you today. What I will have to say will be radically different from anything you hear from anybody else. I hope to give the people here something to think about. I harbor no illusions that you will all agree with me, but I became a Libertarian candidate back in December when the Libertarian Party won a lawsuit against the two old parties, trying to state that, you know, we could not be on the ballot if we did not pay filing fees, which the previous legislature had put in place. Filing fees support primaries. The Libertarian Party does not have primaries. Therefore, we were being forced to support our opponents. We won that lawsuit. That result is still under appeal. And it wasn't until after August 21st that I was assured of having a place on the ballot. And apparently, since Mr. Paxson can't read a calendar very well, on the 28th, they tried to get us kicked off again. And the judge said, no, you're a week late. So here I am. As you know, my son is a teacher. My wife worked for AISD for several years, both as a substitute teacher and front office staff. Education is of vital importance to me. Here's the first radical thing I have to say. I'm all in favor of public education, just not necessarily government education. They are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
The government has a serious conflict of interest in trying to run education. What the government generally wants to do is produce citizens who are familiar with, comfortable with, and compliant with the role, status, and size of government. I would be pleased as could be for there to be multiple options for parents. I would like for whatever decisions are made to rest in the hands of the parents, whether that is public schools, government schools, parochial schools, private schools, let the parents decide.
Great. And so you heard us talking a little bit about the specifics around retired teachers and
Yes.
the pensions of the state and the healthcare. And so I'm curious, what are your, as you've dug into that information, what are your thoughts on, you know, the pension plan we have for former teachers and how we give them retirement money and healthcare once they leave the classroom? And are there things you want to change if you are elected into the seat?
I will agree with Representative Howard that any monies teachers get from TRS is deferred compensation. As regards the TRS, teacher retirement system, I would propose retiring it. I believe they have been very, very poor stewards of your money. To support that, I will say two things: office building and return on investment. I would propose putting the decisions regarding those funds in the hands of the individual teachers who can form associations, purchase, you know, whatever form of compensation with their deferred compensation as they see fit. And I would probably require some level of fiduciary, responsibility on anyone dealing with those funds. As regards healthcare, Again, I would put that in the hands of the individual teachers, not in the hands of the TRS. We have not had in this country a true free market healthcare system in decades, at least 50 years. The government has gotten into it, the government has messed it up, and the government is the reason we are still in the mess we find ourselves. If we had true open market, free market competition in healthcare systems, the costs would be radically reduced and our care would radically improve.
And so if you're elected and working within, the systems that exist and having to work with Republicans and Democrats, how would you address, helping retired teachers in terms of like adding more to the TRS system, or how would you be a part of these conversations if elected to the House? Knowing that there's two parties that think very differently than you do.
Not to sound too heretical or blasphemic, but I would be the voice of one crying in the wilderness, advocating for choice for the teachers, getting rid of the bureaucracy as much as possible. Again, I think TRS has not been a good steward. I think they have failed the teachers. I think the teachers would be better served by open market, free market solutions, and just advocating for that whenever possible.
Mm-hmm. Something a lot of people deal with in Central Texas is very high property taxes that often don't stay locally at their school, and the recapture system is really important in terms of talking about when we're talking about school districts and, just homeowners and people who live here. And I'm curious, how do you look at the recapture system and how property taxes stay and don't stay within the various school districts where taxpayers live?
Again, this is another arena in which the government messes it up. If we are going to have a publicly funded school system in whatever form that takes, there has to be some equity among richer districts and poorer districts, because we all live in Texas. We are all funded by the taxpayers of Texas. If that means that what are called wealthier school districts share with what are called poorer school districts, we have to find the equity there. And the less that the established system is involved, the better. Too often it is whoever squeaks the loudest or greases the wheel the most gets the favorable outcome.
And I'm curious when it comes to things, like managing property taxes and as you mentioned before, managing your own healthcare and things like that. How would you suggest if you took away TRS as the umbrella organization managing it? Because as you said, they have been mishandling it. How would you suggest going forward in terms of structuring how people get their healthcare, how people get access to, as you said, the deferred compensation? If you take away the organization, what do you replace it with?
That vacuum would be filled by the free market quite easily. And teachers themselves, or in whatever groups of associations they wish to form, would be able to ask questions, find the best solution for them, and choose for that system. The ones who do well will succeed. The ones who do poorly will fail. And with the fiduciary component involved, that reduces the end risk for the teachers themselves.
Mm-hmm. Great. So we're in the last minute. Is there anything else you wanted to say to this group that I haven't asked before we move on?
As regards COVID,
mm-hmm.
If you look at what happens, government has been the problem. from identifying the problem at the start back in late 2019, early 2020, to interfering with entrepreneurial development of testing, of treatment, of vaccines. Government throws up roadblocks, gives out conflicting information and hinders the process. I would advocate for entrepreneurial solutions, and that will move us forward.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Moore. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. And so next we're going to speak with Celia Israel, who's the incumbent for House District 50. Welcome. Nice to see you.
How are you?
I'm well. So thanks for joining us. Tell this group a little bit about your background with public schools, teachers, all of that before you got to the legislature.
Well, I did a tour of duty at a Catholic school for 8 years, and then I went to the Big Bad Public High School in El Paso, Texas, much to my mother's dismay. Who you could tell by the little Pope Francis over my shoulder, I'm still hopelessly Catholic. But my mom was a teacher's aide. My dad was a truck driver. Very proud of my working class background. It helped forge me. Raised in El Paso, when I first ran for office, many of you were very helpful to me. So thank you for believing in me. And we've been advocating for so long that public education and issues around pension security and honoring our commitment be treated as higher priority issues. And the fact is that in 2018, we had finally the Texas voters woke up. I'm on the elections committee, and of course, voting is really important to me, and voting systems. And Texas had not been voting very well. And then in 2018, we voted at near presidential levels. As a result of that, in 2019, last session, we as a legislature finally invested significant money in public schools and in supporting y'all in your retirement and healthcare. That was one big step. And our challenge this January is going to be to defend those gains. And I say for everybody who's running for office, one of the criteria should be, will you make sure that we do not cut back on what we just gained, because it's been so hard. You guys remember the last economic recession, we cut education by $5.4 billion. And we didn't touch the rainy day fund back then. So I'm glad to say that we have now strong bipartisan support for this, and we need to move forward. So I'm excited for this election. It's going to be a huge election, and despite the difficulties of putting together a budget, I'm excited for the next legislative session, where I think we'll see a lot of new faces, new energy that truly represent the diversity that Texas is.
And just knowing that the financial situation in the state is so different this session because of the pandemic, and there will be a lot of competing needs. Can you commit to what you said, keeping the gains from House Bill 3 and contributions to retired teachers? Or is that something that you need to wait until you get in the room and get information? What can you commit to right now?
Well, I can absolutely commit that I will not support a budget that doesn't maintain the gains that we achieved. And it does become difficult, but for those of you who are watching the political winds, you know that one of the big opportunities that we have, regardless of party, we need more balance in Texas so that we can have a House of Representatives that is a counterbalance to the Senate. And I say that knowing that the Honorable Judith Zaffarini is in line waiting to talk to you guys as well. But the Senate, it wasn't so long ago that Dan Patrick was talking about really harmful things to public education. And then we recalibrated in 2018 and finally had a session where we're moving forward. And we have an opportunity. We're 9 seats away to get partisan with you guys for a minute, only because of if we can flip the House into Democratic control, that means we get the gavel. And with the gavel, you determine who's the chair of the Public Ed Committee, who's the chair of the Pensions Committee. The chair determines everything. It's like that movie Toy Story. The claw determines who stays and who goes. And when we have the gavel, we control the tone and the tenor of what we determine is a priority for the Texas House, and that helps Senator Zaffarini and others who want to help you to put a counterbalance to Dan Patrick, who has not been helpful. And but I'm excited, back to the election, that Texans are going to vote in record numbers, and when the dust settles, we will again stand up for that mainstream voice in Texas who is exhausted of us fighting over who gets to go into whose bathroom and fake religious freedom, to say there are real families, many of whom are represented in this room today, who have given their life to public service, and we owe them something. So we will be there to stand up for you, and I'm very excited for this election.
So you heard us talking about healthcare earlier in terms of how retired teachers access their healthcare. A specific question about that is, right now, retired teachers are not in the employee retirement system, and someone correct me if I'm wrong. And so is that something that you would support, is enveloping retired teachers into that system to get a different level of benefits?
I would support that. I don't know the particulars of it. It does worry me when I see that we're leasing premium office space in downtown Austin and not spending our money in a smart way. When we are not investing our dollars to maximum benefit. There's a really cool series of articles in the Dallas Morning News, if you haven't seen, really helps somebody like me. I'm a realtor and a state rep, so I am not a financial wizard, but the articles put things in very clear terms about the simple need for us to maximize the funds that we have. And if that means co-location or more partnership or wholesale change, that of course we have the sunset review process for all of that stuff. But I think we're in the midst of a revolution right now, of an economic revolution. We're in the midst of what I think is a second civil rights movement, where there is change, there is opportunity, and I hope that we do consider that as consider everything as an opportunity.
And going into the next session, is voting for higher contributions to TRS a priority to you, knowing there will be a lot of competing things being asked of you?
Yes, it's a priority for me because I feel so strongly that we can't go around talking about how amazing our economy is without recognizing that would not have happened without a strong public school system. And that strong public school system would not have happened without good women and men who literally save children's lives in the classroom. I'm one of them. When my family was going through a difficult time, a teacher grabbed me by the back of the neck and literally saved my life and said, "You have value. You're going places." So you when you were in the classroom, were instrumental to creating the economic vitality that we have today. Education is the basis for everything. So we owe you a quality of life upon the end of your years of service, and I feel very strongly about that.
Great. It looks like we're in the final couple seconds if there's anything quick you wanted to add before we moved on to the next.
Voting starts Tuesday. Voting starts Tuesday. I plan on being one of those nerds to be there like at 7 a.m. I've been using the phrase crushed glass a lot because people in my orbit are saying they're going to crawl over crushed glass in order to vote.
Mhm.
So it's going to be a historic year, and I can't wait to see all of the array of changes that are going to happen on election night, because I think there's just a huge appetite amongst the voting electorate. The voters this time are going to be a bit younger and more colorful than we have ever seen. And I say, for the love of Texas, let's all get out there and vote and encourage our friends to vote as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for joining us.
Bye, guys.
All right, next we're going to hear from Representative Eddie Rodriguez, who is running to maintain his seat in District 51. Are you here with us, Mr. Rodriguez?
I am.
Great, thank you so much. You know, you are the incumbent, so tell us a little bit about what you have been involved in during your tenure so far as a legislator, and how it relates to current teachers and retired teachers, and then we'll move on to like.
Well, so I've been in office, for those who may not know, I've been in office since 2003 was my first session. So I've been in, this will be my 10th session coming in. And I've worked on various issues over that period of time, and not all of which is education related or teacher related, but a lot of it is, you know, for me, in my district, and I'll just say really briefly that my district is South Austin, South Central Austin, Southeast Austin, and Travis County, and Central East Austin. And there's a lot of diversity of income in those areas. We have some high net worth individuals there, but also some tremendously low income communities there, Dove Springs and others. And it's a growing part of the city of Austin and Travis County. So I focus a lot on education as it pertains to economic development. I want to make sure that if we want to help people get out of a situation in which they're, you know, or they're struggling, we want to help them get out of that. I believe that public education is the main tool for that. And in that regard, that's why teachers are so very important to that, right? We can't have the economy that we want in the state of Texas to benefit everybody if we don't have an educated workforce. And I think teachers are the cornerstone to all of that. So I can get into the weeds of a lot of other issues, but I think for our purposes here, I'll just leave it at that. I do have I have a lot of teachers in my family, a lot of retired teachers in my family. I'm originally from South Texas in the Rio Grande Valley. And I cannot go, well, I haven't been home in a very long time because of COVID, but I can't go home without 3 of my aunts coming to me and just asking me what I'm doing for retired teachers this session or every session. This has been going on for 18 years. So I'm personally invested in that I want to be able to tell my family that I'm doing what I can for retired teachers.
So let's talk about that. When you talk to your aunts, what are some of the things that you can tell them? And let's look forward to this coming session. How are current teachers and retired teachers going to be on your priority list?
Well, it's high on my priority. I mean, I really do think, and it's been said, I don't want to repeat what my other colleagues have said, but it is, we've made a promise to our teachers and we should keep that promise. And I don't know, I know Donna said this in the past to me privately, but I believe that our state budget such, and with that is to help them in their retirement years, and so I would advocate for the state increasing its share of the budget of putting money into TRS. You asked the question, Claire, earlier about ERS and TRS. I would support that notion of bringing that together so that we can have more security for our retired teachers in that regard. I do think we need to have an automatic cost of living adjustment within TRS. I think that's really important as well. I think our first priority is to make make TRS solvent and make it whole, and then we need to plan for long-term investment and to make sure that we're putting more money in there, that the state's doing its share in putting the money in there. And I think that there's an opportunity certainly this session, if the budget is a moral document, which I believe it is, that we can prioritize our retired teachers in that. And I know that's, the House will look, I think will look different next session in terms of the makeup of the House, Democrat, be Republicans. And I know that we have friends like Senator Zaffarini in the Senate that will help fight for our retired teachers. So.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. As someone who's been in the legislature for 18 years, you said? Or was it? Yeah. So
18, who's counting?
Yeah. So what would have to happen? Because I'm sure Democrats say this all the time. We'd love to do this for TRS. We'd love to increase contributions. But what practical changes would have to happen to actually see this kind of funding increase and these retired teachers see the difference?
Yeah, and there's no doubt the next session is a tough session. I'm not. Yep. I don't like to tell people that that this is something that's going to happen. 100% certainty. I mean, that's just it's not fair and it's not right for me to say that. But I will say that next session will be a tough session. As Donna mentioned, we're at a almost $5 billion shortfall, which is a pretty big change, going from almost $3 billion surplus to almost a $5 billion shortfall is pretty substantial. I served on the Ways and Means Committee last session, so I know that there are things that we can do to increase revenue that don't necessarily mean heavy increases in taxes, but there are loopholes that some of our citizens, be it corporate citizens or individuals, are able to get out of paying certain taxes. I think we need to look at our tax system really closely. I think COVID has really jump-started us and kicked us in the rear into the 21st century. That's very clear. I know that my kids right now are inside I'm actually not at the Capitol, I'm at my house, but the kids are inside, they're doing their schoolwork. They have a half day today. They see their doctor. Both of them actually had doctor's appointments yesterday. They did that online, and people are working online. And so we got school, work, and even seeing your doctor online. So we have an opportunity to move things forward in terms of the 21st century. And with that, I think we need a 21st century tax system, and we have to be realistic about what we have out there. There's some things are just not going to fly, right? I could go out there and say we need a fair tax system, including an income tax, and that's just not going to go anywhere. You all know that. But realistically, there are some mechanisms that we have. There are some issues, or rather some taxes out there that are not being paid, or that could be expanded as well. And so I think we can look at that. I think that's number one, to see how we can increase the money in the budget. But other than that, I think there's other things, Claire, that we can look at as well. And that is, there's always attempts to change the defined benefits pension plan changing it from defined to another more contribution-based benefit plan. We need to fight those things as well. So there's lots of other issues that we can do around the periphery. But I think if we prioritize teachers and TRS, I think that's the first step that we can do for next session.
Knowing that in the next session, you will have a Republican governor still, and many Republicans in the legislature, how would changing the tax system, like you were saying, how realistic is that?
Well, I think
yeah.
That's a good question, Claire. I mean, I think it's I'm under no illusion. I mean, I've been here, like I said, 18 years. I've never been in a Democratic majority in the House. But you still have a Senate that is going to be Republican dominated, and the lieutenant governor and the governor. I think you just have to, I think there is opportunity to have these discussions because we are in a serious deficit. And I think that there's a lot of need out there. I think one thing that COVID did demonstrate to everybody, Republican and Democrat alike, is really where our shortcomings are. And I think that there could be opportunity to talk meaningfully about some revenue increases that are, that I think could be long overdue.
Yeah.
So I think that there is opportunity because the need is there.
And as this group is all kind of Central Texas and the various counties, and I asked this earlier, but we know that property taxes are what fund so much of everything, from the state level. And I just know, like here in Austin, we're seeing, asking for more property taxes to do transportation. And so voters are going to have that on their minds as they go to the ballot as well. And so tell me a little bit about how you approach, recapture, and how how do you balance, we need more money for all of these things, but it's all falling on property taxes. And like you said, with no hope of an income tax, how do you balance that for your community to provide, but also not, because so many people complain about high property taxes.
Sure. A great question as well. I think that, really the crux of it is the state has to invest more money. I mean, there's a direct correlation between what the state contributes to our public schools and what the locals contribute, right? There's a direct correlation. I think the more that the state would put in, the probably the lower the taxes will be at the local level. I think there's no doubt about that. So I think that's number one, is that I think what we did last session was great. I think we needed the only downside from last session in terms of the increased funding that we had for public schools was that it was kind of a one-time deal. It wasn't baked into kind of our budget and how we're going to continue doing that. And that's the one big downside to that. So I think we need to look at it so that the state is will always be a certain percentage of, we'll be committed to paying a certain percentage every year, every biennium of public education. And I think that's one way to look at that. I mean, as far as other ways of funding it outside of property taxes, that is just the system that we have in place, period. I mean, it's just the way that is. And I think, a lot of times people forget about that, and that may not be the case with my friends here on this Zoom, but they're in my district, or certainly in Austin, it's over 60% renters. A lot of people rent. So as far as property taxes go, they do pay property taxes via their rent, but many renters don't really see it as a single tax bill, at the end of the year, right? So it's a little bit different for renters too. Just want to throw that out there because that's a big chunk of my constituency are renters. In fact, I rent my house.
Me too.
So who could afford to live in Austin anymore, right?
Not me.
But no, it's a serious question and a serious issue. I do think that the answer, as with many things, is more investment from the state to kind of to address the property tax dilemma.
Perfect timing. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you all.
All right. And so next, and correct me if I'm wrong, because this was the section that got changed, we're going to speak with Senator Judith Zaffirini. That's right now? Okay, great. Senator, are you on?
I am.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
So you're the first senator on this call so far. We've been talking to everybody in the House, and so tell me, as you look at this election and the upcoming session, what are your goals in the Senate when it comes to retired teachers and current teachers?
Well, good morning. I'm Judith Zaffirini, State Senator for District 21, which includes Southeast Travis County, and I was so glad to be invited to speak to you for about 5 minutes this morning. I want to begin by quoting the Henry Adams, a great historian who wrote so long ago, "A teacher affects eternity. He can never tell where his, and I would add her, influence stops." Every one of us is a product of the toil, determination, and patience of our teachers, and legislative candidates typically, if not always, express their appreciation for your influence. Expressions of gratitude are not enough. We owe our educators more. We owe them an affordable education that doesn't straddle them with burdensome student loan debts. We owe them the resources to do their jobs properly. We owe them compensation commensurate with the importance of their profession. And we owe them stable, properly funded retirement benefits and access to affordable health coverage. As a former educator, I know that once a teacher, always a teacher, which is why I'm so delighted to serve on the Senate committees on education, higher education, and state affairs, positions from which I can continue to make a difference for you before, during, and especially after your teaching years. Last year, we made transformative investments in education via House Bill 3, but next year, we'll face incredible budgetary challenges because of the pandemic. Count me among those, such as the Democratic representatives from whom you heard today, who will advocate strongly for using the rainy day fund as appropriate, for finding new revenues, especially those which under the circumstances might enjoy more legislative support than otherwise, and protecting education and health and human services, including TRS and TRS care, from any proposed across-the-board funding cuts. Equally important, we must continue our efforts to pay teachers better. We made strides last session, but we need to do more. Texas ranks 39th in average teacher salary. That's not good enough, especially for the 10th largest economy in the world. We also need to make college more affordable, so prospective teachers don't incur enormous debts. And we need to find ways to help them reduce their student loan debts. Last session, for example, I was delighted to pass Senate Bill 37, which frankly prohibited the absolutely ridiculous practice of taking away the professional licenses of those, including teachers, who were behind on their student loan payments. On a personal note, this is the 4th year that my son has awarded $2,000 grants in my name to help from 5 to 10 teachers annually pay their college student loan debts. Equally important, we must live up to our commitments to our retired teachers. That means, first and foremost, a fully funded, actuarially sound, defined benefit pension plan. That's what you signed up for when you became educators, and that's what the legislature should deliver. Next session, we'll have to defend vigorously the progress made in Senate Bill 12, which put TRS on the path to actuarial soundness. That means budgeting appropriately so the state meets our obligation to our teachers. Budgets are moral documents. If some legislators can't live up to such important commitments, what does that say about their ability to lead, their ability to honor their word? Stability must be our short-term goal, but our long-term goal should be a pension plan that can manage cost of living adjustments for retirees and keep premiums low for healthcare. We also should strive to innovate and to improve our services continually by studying long-term funding structures that may prove more stable and creating windows for retirees to re-enter TRS care and stabilize the system for everyone else. While I'm delighted to work with and for all retired teachers, I am especially proud to represent those who live in my district. If you do, I hope you know my record of bipartisan effectiveness, having passed more bills than any legislator in the history of the state of Texas, and that I always will champion our teachers before, during, and after your teaching years. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today. I'm Judah Saffiedini, and if you live in Senate District 21, Southeast Travis County, I respectfully request your vote. My prayer is that the Lord will bless you, protect you from harm, and inspire you to continue to excel. Thank you so much for everything you do and everything you will do. May God bless Texas.
Thank you. I will say the senator was not told it was Q&A, so that's why she had a statement prepared. So we're going to move on to the next one, which is Clayton Tucker, who is running for Senate District 24. Are you with us, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Nice to see you.
Thank you all so much for being here. And right before we begin, let me just really thank everyone for, all of y'all for being here today, for doing what y'all do, for inviting me, and of course, for being educators. Might be a little biased since I'm a former educator myself.
Yeah, so tell us, because you are not an incumbent, as many of our speakers have been, so tell us a little bit about why you are running for this seat. You just mentioned that you were a former educator. To keep the frame around the world of education, tell us a little bit more about your experience with public education, and then we'll dig in more.
Sure thing. So on the campaign trail, I get asked 3 questions quite often. Why are you running? Why are you a Democrat? And how old are you again? And I always like to tell folks, well, I'm 29 years old, or as I like to call the age, LBJ, FDR, and Lincoln were when they first got started. I'm a Democrat because my grandfather, who I called Pawpaw, always told me, Mr. C, you can do anything you set your mind to. I only ask you 2 things. Never become a politician, but if you do, make sure you're a Democrat. And I'm running because, frankly, because of my family. You know, I look to them, and they are doing everything right. They're playing by the rules. They work hard. They work on the family ranch, and they can't afford healthcare. They can't afford good education. They're barely making it by. And I know they're not alone. There are so many other Texans and so many other families just like that. So quick bit about me, and then we'll talk about education. Again, name's Clayton Tucker. I am a beekeeper and rancher. I am a former kindergarten teacher. I had 15 boys, 5 girls, and pure mayhem in my classroom, as it should be. And I am a water researcher. I was a water researcher for a period of time with the National Science Foundation, and I worked with Commissioner Jim Hightower. I'm certain a lot of y'all don't remember him. For everyone who's unfamiliar, he was the agriculture commissioner in the 80s. It was basically him and Ann Richards. In my opinion, they're 2 peas in a pod. They were the last 2 Democrats to win statewide. I've been working with him about healthcare policy reform, really fixing our healthcare, because those are my big 3 issues, what I call my main ones that got me involved: healthcare, environment, and education. And I really do believe, you know, being an educator has done a lot actually to prepare me and to train me for the Texas State Senate. And, you know, in some ways, you know, I always like to make this joke that, you know, when I was a kindergarten teacher, I would come up with a lesson plan. I'd be so excited about the lesson plan. And I walk into the classroom, and then one kid's vomiting over here and another kid's peeing in the corner. And you're just like, all right, here's some coloring books, with this figured out. And then you're running for office, and it's suddenly a global pandemic. So yeah, I mean, education is really important to me, and I'll actually pass it back to you, Claire, so we can like talk
Wonderful.
about specifics.
So I think as you know, this is a group of retired educators. And so we've been talking about healthcare all hour on this. And so talk a little bit about when you say you want to reform healthcare. I mean, generally, how does that look for you if you're elected, but also for this group of retired teachers who are in a specific, you know, health plan after retiring from being in schools?
So this is a very complicated issue, and there's multifaceted. So ideally, the true solution to healthcare needs to come from the federal level, but we Texas, we don't have to wait. We actually don't have to wait for DC to figure out its mess. We can do a lot to fix our own backyards first. So, you know, a lot of talk has been about expanding Medicaid. That will do a pretty significant amount to close the coverage gap, and can drop property taxes. I believe that was mentioned as well. In some of my counties, like Bell County, for instance, 6% of their county taxes go to indigent healthcare service. That Medicaid expansion might not eliminate that full 6%, but it could easily, I would say, probably do at least half. So that would definitely help. As far with the teachers and retirement service, I mean, there's various things the state can do. The state can create a board, and this is something I worked with Commissioner Jim Hightower on. It was called the Healthy Texas Board, where it would negotiate down drug prices that would benefit retired teachers, but that also benefit everyone. Because right now, very few of us, I would argue none of us, have negotiating power when it comes to negotiating down drug prices. Texas can create its own universal system. As far with the teachers' healthcare system, better funding really that comes down to a lot of things. I know that's probably going to sound like a broken record on that, but that's just a couple of the things that we can do.
Yeah, you know, something we asked a couple other candidates was like, would you support moving teachers into the employee retirement system in terms of using healthcare and getting different coverage through that?
I do believe the more, generally speaking, at least with healthcare, the bigger the negotiating block, the better off we're going to be. Because look, I mean, the more we work together, you know, FDR always put it that all that government is organized self-help. So in terms of healthcare, if we create a greater negotiating block, we can negotiate better prices in terms of premiums, better prices in terms of prescription drugs and services. So I would be open to that, but I would need to see the exact legislation, because I don't want to make a blanket statement that I would be okay with that, because there could be some trap language, for lack of better terms. But I would be open to looking into that.
And so when it comes to school funding, if you are elected, talk a little bit about how you would approach, funding schools, funding the TRS system, like how would you approach the funding mechanisms to our world of education here in Texas?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So for any exact details, like exact numbers and calculations, you can go to my website, tuckerfortexas.com. I think it's /school-finance. Just go to our value section and or education section, and you can find exactly like the numbers and stuff. I'm also a numbers person, but to kind of talk about funding, well, first off, I'm not going to accept any type of budget cuts. I know this is going to be a very tough year. The next budget is going to be very, very tough given COVID and everything else. But what we can do, my caller did a pretty good job talking about the closing the fair and equal loophole, and that should bring in around $5 billion, if I remember correctly. If we decide to start treating cannabis like we treat alcohol and tobacco, that can bring in another, some numbers I've seen are 3 billion. I think that's probably on the low end, but I would need to see better projections. I know we need to fix our lottery system. They say 50% of the lottery money should be going to education. It's not. So we can boost that up. And there's a lot of other things we can do from, savings with healthcare. So we actually create a true solid negotiating block for healthcare, and we allow to lower healthcare for ISDs, for counties, cities, and the state. That will free up more funds. So those are just some of the things that we can do to increase revenue, because I do think the main point of what you're getting towards is we're going to have to find a way to increase revenue. There is literally no way out of it right now, at least not for the next few years. So those are ways I would find to increase revenue to fund our public schools and, of course, our retirement system.
Mm-hmm. And so for the, something we were talking about with Representative Rodriguez is cost of living adjustment for retired teachers. And what do you think about adjusting that every, budget so the payment to teachers looks different?
I think it's a fundamental mistake I have two thoughts. First thought is, education is the profession that creates all professions. So we have to pay them what they're owed, both in terms of when they are working to service their community by being an educator and when they're retired. So I absolutely support a cost of living adjustment. The one thing I would add and one thing I would tweak is that I don't really trust the legislative to do it every single year, every single 2 years, that manual adjustment. So what I would like to see is an automatic sort of adjustment period where basically we can tag it to the inflation rate, for instance. So we'll say, every 2 years, cost of living will go up by the average inflation rate for that 2-year period. Just make it automatic. We don't have to worry about it anymore, because my concern is if we have to do it basically manually every 2 years, I mean, we're kind of asking for trouble, in my opinion, at that point. I would rather just make it an automatic system where we don't even have to worry about it.
Great. I think we're running just up to time. I got the 1 minute message about a minute ago.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining us, Clayton. We appreciate your time.
Hey, I appreciate all y'all. Y'all can learn more about me at my website, tuckerfortexas.com. I have a lot more details on the education platform, including what we need to do about the school to prison pipeline. That's a huge issue for my district. Actually, let me quickly say my district, because District 24 has been ignored for a while. And it starts up in Abilene, not all of Abilene, only about half of it. Stretches down to the whole Killeen, Fort Hood metro area, including Line Passes, where I live. It has the southwest part of Travis County, so Spicewood, Bee Cave, Lakeway, Barton Creek, and then goes down to Kerrville and Bandera, and also has all the Highland Lakes area. And again, thank all y'all. I really do appreciate everything y'all do.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And I didn't say this out loud and someone asked in the chat, so I appreciate Frank Pomeroy pulled out at the last minute. So he was on your original schedule, but isn't joining us this morning. So I'm sorry I didn't say that before we went to Clayton. Great. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to the next person. John Busey is the incumbent for House District 136. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Wonderful. So you've kind of heard a lot of the topics we're interested in. So tell us a little bit about your background and your time so far in the House and what you've done in terms of the world of education. We like
Sure.
that subject.
I'm a freshman state representative. I was elected in 2018 to serve House District 136, which is all within Williamson County, but it's the Austin part of Williamson County, Cedar Park and Leander. I actually just came from the Williamson County Retired Teacher Forum, so we're doing these back to back today, and I appreciate y'all accommodating our scheduling for that. Last session, you know, the great accomplishment of the session was House Bill 3 and SB 12, and taking care of our current teachers and our students through House Bill 3. But as I say that, I know that's just the beginning. We have to work hard, because even with those increases, the biggest increases in 30 years, we're still not anywhere near Texas should be. So I believe strongly that every session should be a public education session. Every session we should look at the formulas and make sure they make sense for our school districts. And we should be working to increase funding to where the state is paying at a minimum above 50% of the cost. With SB 12, it was a bill that I was proud to be a co-sponsor of. There was a time during session where it got nerve-wracking a little bit. SB 12 got held up and got delayed, if y'all were following it closely. And so I met regularly with Dr. Bonin, who was the House sponsor, to make sure we were moving that along and reporting back to Williamson County retired teachers. I think what we have to do is continue to make sure we protect SB 12's gains. It's going to have incremental increase, and I'm afraid that people want to stop those incremental increases to balance the budget. I'll do everything I can to oppose that, and we need to make sure that SB 12 continues to get implemented as we promised last session. I want to make sure that we're working towards a cost of living adjustment. I think that was the talking points. My office had been meeting with TRTA and Wilco Retired Teacher Association throughout the interim for how we could get that done. I understand now with the pandemic that some of the legislative priorities by TRTA have changed a little bit. At a minimum, we want to make sure that conversation is at the forefront and that we're looking at studies for how we can have that long-term cost of living adjustment. Also, how we can deal with the long-term need for TRS care. I think so much of my time last session was around these two bills and working on them. And next session is going to be around protecting these two bills. I want to make sure that we do not balance the budget on the back of our teachers, our students, our retirees, or at the cost of healthcare. In my other areas of focus in the legislature, I serve on the elections committee, and fighting for voting rights is at the forefront of what I spend my time on. I've also led the charge on Medicaid expansion, including carrying the amendment that forced a vote that unfortunately failed. But Medicaid expansion, I never miss an opportunity to talk about it and what it means for our state. It would help all of us, and we're going to continue to fight for that every single day. My wife is a public school teacher. She taught for many years in Taylor ISD doing pre-K special ed inclusion. And I come from family of educators, and so making sure we have y'all's back is a top priority for mine.
What do you think are going to be the biggest obstacles to keeping school funding and keeping TRS and the healthcare funded this coming session? What do you think are being the competing priorities with other members of the House?
Sure. Well, we have to take care of COVID recovery, and so that's going to be a budgetary challenge. But I think Senator Zaffarini said it. Our budget is our values. I think of an old Joe Biden. It has nothing to do with him being the nominee. It's an old Joe Biden quote. It says, "Show me your budget, and I'll show you your values." If we want to protect House Bill 3 gains and SB 12 gains, we can get it done. We can use the rainy day fund, which I'm committed to doing. We can look at other areas of revenue, such as stopping some of the corporate loopholes, looking at new options of revenue through different legalization options and things like that in Texas. But we've got to get it done, and it has to be our priority. If we prioritize public education, we prioritize our retired employees, and if we prioritize healthcare, we can get that done. Plus, if we bring in Medicaid expansion, that's about $11 billion in federal funds a year that come back to the state. That's going to help us a lot, and so it needs to get done. But I think the challenge will be in those fights to protect those gains. Hopefully that's not true. Hopefully we'll get bipartisan support to at the minimum maintain those gains. I think another area to be concerned about is we increased from 1% to 1.25% for TRS care. I want to make sure that stays the case. I'd like to see that increased even more, but so much what we have to do is make sure we don't go backwards this session. And so it's going to be hard work, hard conversations, but if we use the rainy day fund, if we make some practical decisions, I think we can get it done.
and you heard me ask this question to other people, but in terms of care, would you support moving TRS recipients into the employee retirement system?
You know, I was listening to other people talk about that, and I'd love to know more where TRTA is on that. I think one of the points made earlier is a strong one, that the larger the numbers, the more, you know, ability you have to go negotiate a better deal. But I would follow the lead of TRTA and our retired teachers. If that's what they want to see, then I'd help support that. But most importantly, what I think we need to do right now is make the program stronger that we have, and that's a cost of living adjustment. That's more investment into TRS care. I think if we get that done, that's necessary. It's been 16 years, I believe, since we had a real cost of living adjustment. A 13th check, I was proud to help get that done, but to me that meant we didn't get where we needed to be last session. So I would love to have more conversations with TRTA about if they would like to move the program into the other.
How would you structure a cost of living adjustment, or how would you feel comfortable supporting that?
Well, I think if we get it done, it should also get done tied to inflation. Yeah, y'all shouldn't have to come back to us every session, you know, fighting for that. It should be inherent. We've made a promise to you based on the promise you made to our community. You devoted your career to educating the future of the state, and we need to live up to it. And I don't think, you know, I hear terrible stories from retired teachers in my community that have to decide between healthcare and their grocery bills, or, you know, they're living on $1,600 a month, and we've got rising costs, especially in the suburbs like I represent, that are threatening to push people out. And I just think that's not adequate. So I want to see an increase. I think tying it to inflation, so you don't have to spend the rest of your retired time coming to the Capitol every session to fight for it, is the way to get it done.
And, you know, as we know, in Central Texas, cost of living is going up dramatically every single year. And so tell us a little bit about how you've approached, you know, taxes and property taxes, and as that being the main source to fund all of these programs we're talking about.
Well, and that's a great point. In my area, which is more of the suburbs of Austin, up here in the 183 corridor, you know, a lot of people that move to our community move for affordability. And now that's getting tighter and tighter every year too. So it's, you know, people had to leave Central Austin. They wanted to stay in Austin, so they came to Austin Wilco, and now it's getting harder there. What we can do, the most important thing I think the state legislature can do, is increase our cost to public education. I think if we go, you got to go all the way back to Governor White, when that was really, I think it was at 56% of the shared cost came from the state, as opposed to less of a burden on the local. I think the state needs to figure out how to increase our share up above 50% to relieve that local burden, which ultimately can lower property taxes.
We got a question in the chat back about cost of living, and someone asked, could cost of living be tied to Social Security cost of living adjustment?
I think it could. I think we could look at a bunch of options. I think, you know, and this is more of a federal issue, but the other issue we have in Texas, and I signed a resolution that we sent to Congress because the kind of a double dip issue in Texas with Social Security and other benefits. So we need to make sure we take care of that too. But yeah, I think we're open to creative ideas. I would love to learn more, but I know ultimately what we got to do is we got to prioritize our values in our budget and get y'all some more money.
Yeah. So it looks like we're behind the last minute. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up that I haven't asked, or you heard us talk about earlier that you wanted to address yourself?
Well, if I didn't say it in the intro, I'll reaffirm it now, that I'm committed to our gains on House Bill 3 and SB 12 and to fighting for healthcare for all Texans. And the start of that is to get Medicaid expansion. I will not support a budget that cuts those House Bill 3 and SB 12 gains. We've got to make sure we get that done. I'm encouraged because I've heard bipartisan support for that. I hope when we get into the building after election season, that remains true. There was bipartisan support for both those bills last time. I hope protecting them gets just as much support.
Great. Thank you so much, Representative.
Hey, thank you all for this opportunity. I truly appreciate it.
All right. Okay. And last but not least, we have James Tallarico. And please, I'm so sorry if I said your last name incorrectly.
No, you got it perfectly.
Okay, good. Thanks for joining us. You are the incumbent for House District 52. And so you have heard, you're on the Public Education Committee, you've been doing this work. So tell us a little bit about your history and your work so far within the world of schools, current teachers, and especially retired teachers, and then we'll dig in.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's wonderful to be here with y'all. My name is James Tallarico. I have the honor of serving as state representative for House District 52, which is Southeast Williamson County. I was born in my district in Round Rock to a single mom who didn't get to go to college. She worked overtime at a hotel in downtown Austin to provide for both of us, but I was lucky enough to be living in one of the best public school districts in the entire state in Round Rock ISD. And the teachers in those schools changed the trajectory of my life and allowed me to go from our little one-bedroom apartment to getting degrees from the University of Texas and Harvard University. And so when I finished college, the first thing I wanted to do was become a public school teacher to repay that favor. And I taught sixth grade language arts on the west side of San Antonio ISD, one of the poorest neighborhoods in our state. And I met 11 and 12-year-old children in the 21st century in the state of Texas who couldn't read and who couldn't write. And in that moment, I decided I wanted to devote my life to helping to right that wrong. And so I ran for office as a public school teacher, got elected in 2018, and I served on the Public Education Committee and helped write House Bill 3, which provided $12 billion in new funding into our system, helped lower some of the property tax burden that we were just talking about with my friend Representative Busey, and was a co-author of SB 12, which ensured that we shored up the pension system for TRS and also got y'all a 13th check. So, you know, I am working my tail off to make sure that I win this seat again in November and be able to go back to the session next year at the Capitol, because we've got even bigger challenges than we faced in the last session, a public health crisis that's raging out of control, an economic collapse that's devastating families and communities across Texas, and possibly a cataclysmic budget shortfall that we'll need to figure out how we're going to close. So I think now more than ever, we need a teacher back in that house.
Okay, so let's dig into that. As someone who's going to be on the public ed committee during really difficult budget talks, how are you going to approach keeping, like, as everyone's been talking about, keeping gains from House Bill 3 and Senate Bill 12, and kind of talk us through specifically the conversations you need to have to keep that stuff in place and not readjust money for other things that people need?
Yeah, great question. And I'll probably start with my own personal experience, because I went into the classroom as a teacher in the fall of 2011, which was the semester after the legislature cut more than $5 billion from our public education system. So I saw firsthand the devastating impact of these types of cuts. I taught 45 kids in one classroom. Some of the kids were sitting on the air conditioner because there weren't enough seats. I paid for school supplies out of my own pocket. And I saw critical services cut from my most vulnerable students. And so back then I promised myself, if I ever got a little bit of influence, if I ever got a little bit of power, that I would do everything I could to prevent that from happening again. And so I think we need, when we're looking at this budget shortfall next session, we have to have folks who have experienced cuts firsthand, who know the impact personally, and a voice that I can provide that most of my other colleagues who are, you know, wealthy lawyers and wealthy bankers aren't going to be able to talk about. But I can give that personal testimony, that personal witness next session if I'm sent back to the Capitol. You know, I also think we need folks who have a history of working across the aisle. I authored 68 bipartisan bills with my Republican colleagues last session alone, my first session. And so I built those relationships with my Republican counterparts, and I'll be able to leverage those relationships to ensure that we're protecting kids and teachers and our retirees. And last thing I'll say is that, you know, I think we've got to offer alternatives for revenue and really introduce new revenue streams that could help close the budget shortfall that we're going to face. And I've already done that on the campaign trail. You know, tapping the rainy day fund should be number one on our list. You know, the Republican nominee that I'm running against has already said that he's not going to tap the rainy day fund. He doesn't think the crisis is that bad. So that's one. Two, I think we've got to close the massive exemptions and loopholes in our tax code that give huge amounts of money away to big corporations in our state at the expense of working people and students and families and retirees. So closing those loopholes could bring in about $40 billion per biennium. That we should look there. And then I think we also got to look at possible new revenue streams, bringing in new revenue. And I've been open about some of those. And so I think we really have to be open to not just talking about the expenses side, but talking about the revenue side as well. Because as many of you already know, here in Texas, the poorest Texans pay more as a percentage of their income than the wealthiest Texans do. So we've already got a lopsided revenue system. And I think this is a perfect opportunity to right that imbalance and bring in much needed funds during this budget shortfall.
And so this year, will you be able to do work on teacher retirement system, healthcare for retired teachers? Or do you think that won't be a priority within the public ed committee and the House at large?
Yeah, no, I think it will be, especially because the cause of this economic collapse was the public health crisis that we have not addressed at the federal level or the state level. The reason that we're in this mess is because we have had an absolute failure of leadership from the White House to the governor's mansion. And so we have got to tackle the public health crisis. We've got to tackle Medicaid expansion. We've got to tackle the affordability of healthcare. We've got to do all those things if we're going to right the economic ship and get us back on track.
Mm-hmm. And how are you going to approach keeping the gains for from House Bill 3 in terms of public school funding? Because like you said, I think a lot of people are worried, like, oh, is this going to look like it did years ago when we had to make cuts when schools have paid for? I was just in a school this morning, and the things the principal was telling me they had to buy just to bring students back, it's been a lot. And so how do you convince others, and how do you, prepare data and stuff that doesn't happen for schools? Like you say, that's a goal.
Yeah, well, my experience so far in the political arena is that in a negotiation, you have to start from a strong stance. And so I've already made a firm public commitment that I will not vote for a budget that cuts health or education. And I'm organizing my colleagues to make that same commitment. And I'm pressuring some of my Republican colleagues to sign that pledge in the election year, right? When they're asking for people's votes, I think it's only fair that they tell us whether or not they're going to cut health or education when they go back to the Capitol. And so starting out with a red line that we're not going to cross is key to winning the negotiation. Too often, Democrats, progressives, or people with a functioning heart on both sides of the aisle, we always end up in a position where we're minimizing damage rather than actually influencing the budget process from the beginning. And so I've advocated within our caucus and among our pro-public education allies that we need to start strong from the very beginning. We need to have some non-negotiables. We need to have red lines that we will not cross. And I think that's a different strategy than has been used in the past.
What are your thoughts on changing the cost of living adjustment for retired teachers?
Yeah, it's long overdue. And it's going to be one of my top priorities when I go back into the Capitol. I was proud, as I mentioned, to be a co-author of SB 12, proud of what we did to shore up the pension system, proud of the 13th check, but we have to get that cost of living done, because especially for folks in Central Texas and Austin and in my district in Williamson County, folks are being priced out of their homes, right? The cost of living is skyrocketing in our region especially. And so we're going to have folks squeezed if we don't do something to finally have an adequate and accurate cost of living adjustment.
And what are some of the things you're considering to make that happen? Like, let's dig into what that would actually look like at the legislative level.
Yeah, so it depends on the makeup of the House, and this is always an answer that people don't like to consider. But and the way our political system works, the folks who get voted in November, that really kind of sets the tone and sets the trajectory of what the session is going to look like. A lot of advocates that I talk to make the mistake of coming the first day of session and thinking that they're going to kind of push people toward one policy or the other. They don't realize that the cake is baked, on November 3rd. Who you have in the Capitol, the numbers you have is going to determine what kind of policy outcomes we see at the end of session. So there's a direct link, and that's why I'm so glad you guys are having this forum before the election to pressure candidates and elected officials to make promises now so that we can hold them accountable once the session begins. And so, whether or not we're going to get a cost of living adjustment and what that looks like really depends on who controls the chamber, what type of speaker we have, who controls the Senate, and how much pressure we're going to be able to put on our statewide elected officials, including the governor.
Mm-hmm. And then in terms of healthcare, you heard me asking this question to other people, or no, maybe you weren't because you were in the other part. But and bringing in TRS beneficiaries into the employee retirement system, because they're very different benefits. Yeah. We've been talking about that with other candidates, and is that something you've looked at, and do you support that?
Yeah, I'm for keeping these two things separate, just because we've made so many gains for TRS. We have to do a lot more, especially we haven't even talked about TRS care yet. And unfortunately, our ERS participants are even further behind than our retired teachers are. And honestly, I represent probably more retired state employees than any other legislator, because folks who work for our state government have now retired into Williamson County, where the housing is a little more affordable. And so they are kind of waiting in line. They were told, hey, we're going to do TRS. We're going to help retired teachers in the 86th. We're going to get to y'all in the 87th. I think a lot of us are now doubting whether or not our Republican counterparts are going to keep that promise, given the economic climate and the budget forecast that we're looking at.
Great. I think that was the time bell. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. I don't know. That is all the candidates we had joining us. So I don't know if Craig or Joe, you need me to do anything else to wrap it up, or I will give it back to you all.
I would just like to thank all of the candidates and the inspiring support for retired teachers. And I would also like to thank Claire McInerny, who is magnificent in encouraging conversation with our candidates. So thank you all. And I guess I can turn it back to Joe, and we'll go to the regular meeting, and he has some business to take care of. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Craig. And again, I appreciate all the hard work that you and your committee have done. And thank you, Claire, and thank you, candidates. I hope you can hang on for about 15 minutes, because we do have some business, and I'm already getting texts from folks saying, let's see what we can cut. I don't want to shortchange anyone, but I do want to go over a couple of things. So let me just continue with the meeting and try to do it as quickly as we can. So just go through this. So I just want to go ahead real quickly and do a very quick inspirational moment. It's one sentence long. It goes back to 1787 in September, when the Constitutional Convention went ahead and adopted the Constitution that went out to the 13 states for ratification. In this one sentence at the very beginning, the preamble lists the goals of our government that are found throughout the Constitution. And so just looking at it quickly, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. And as we look at this election season, we ask our higher powers to look out for our candidates, keep them safe. We ask that we help make, that they make wise decisions. And we also continue to ask for protection for our teachers and students as they go back to in-person settings. I want Wayne King to go ahead and do a quick memorial for some of our ARTA members who we lost this past month.
Thank you very much. The ARTA Foundation wishes to memorialize 3 people at this time: Laura Dell Blaschke, Renee Daly Simmons, and Amanda Lee Paschal. Laura Dell Blaschke was born in Ingleside, Texas in 1937, and she passed away on August the 30th, 2020 at the age of 83. She was an ARTA member from 2004 to 2019. And Renee Daly Simmons was born in 1932, and she died on September the 10th, 2020 at age 88. She was an ARTA member from 2005 to 2018. Amanda Lee Ponder Paschal was born in Swertner, Texas in 1925, and she passed away on September the 28th at age 95. She was an ARTA member from 2001 to 2013. I would just like to say this about Lee Paschal. Many of you Longhorn fans might remember her son, Randy Paschal, who caught a big pass in the Arkansas game that led to the national championship in 1969. And Lee Paschal was a clerk at Lanier High School for over 20 years. Let's pause for a few moments in silence in the memory of these three people. Thank you. I also have the duty to share with you a little bit about the ARTA Foundation report for October. And I'm glad to see the slide up there that shows the form that you can use out. It's page 9 of our yearbook, and it has a new address for Linda Harvey there. But just a little bit of information on the foundation, and also in the news ad. There's 2 great articles there in the memory of the people I just mentioned, and also about the foundation. So I hope you will read that. But let's talk just a second about ARTA Foundation. It was formed in 1976, and it has given out probably close to or over $400,000 in scholarships to students in the Austin Independent School District. And that's just really a great thing. We have been giving $13,000 for our scholarships, but this year we have to give out $14,000 because we've increased it by 1. So we're giving out 14 scholarships each year. And we only support these scholarships by individual donations. We do not have fundraisers, so we really do need help from you. And currently we have a little less than $4,000 for this year, and that the period of time that we collect it ends on December the 31st, although you give year round, but we really need about $10,000 more to meet our goal for this year. And I hope that you will do that. And also look at designating your gift in memory of a person or in honor of a person. And as I was listening to this a great meeting so far, we might also recognize some of our legislators who have done so much for us at the Capitol over all these past years that help us along. And I think it'd be good for us to honor them sometime with our donations. So make sure that you help us meet our goal of $14,000 and mail your donations to Linda Harvey at ARTA Foundation Treasurer. And the address is listed there, so make sure you do that. Now, that address, you want to make sure that you have that correct because it has just recently changed. And so also want to thank Linda for the great job she does as our treasurer for many years. So help support our scholarships. Make up your mind and plan to do something to help us.
Thank you, Wayne. And Betty Clough, our records chair.
I wanted to welcome all the new guests today. We had a lot of guests. I forgot to count how many. If you're a retired teacher, you need to be sure and join ARTA if you have not done so already. And we also have birthdays. Is that on the next slide? No, there they are. 16 ARTA birthdays. So happy birthday to everyone.
Thank you, Betty. And at this point, I'm going to put the minutes and then the treasurer's report up so we can go ahead and have these approved. So let me just get into that real quickly. Pardon me for a second. Apologies. I'm going to ask you to do this because my computer is stalling right now. If you look at your Newsette, there is a copy of the minutes and the treasurer's report. And so if there are any questions on the minutes, any corrections that need to be made, can that come up right now? Does anyone have any corrections to the minutes? If not, the minutes are filed as they are. The minutes stand. Wayne, treasurer's report.
Our current check, the balance that you have at that particular, okay. Yes, the treasury report is in the Newsette. You'll see the balance in our checking account says about $10,000, a little over $10,000, but actually as of some payments I just made, we're closer to 8,000 because I just paid for the yearbook. But otherwise, I think we're in pretty good shape. We currently have 515 members that have paid dues, and that's pretty much on track to where we thought we would be at this time of the year. So the total amount of funds available as of the end of September was $18,883.45.
Thank you, Wayne. I do want to clarify something. I did see in chat that any money from the ARTA Foundation in the name of a legislature will not come from the ARTA Foundation. We are a 501c3. Anyone who wants to make a personal donation from their own funds may do so, but there will be no money from the ARTA Foundation that is being paid directly or being given directly to support a legislature or to honor a legislature.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yes. Next up, Nancy Lehman Carso, our bylaws co-chair. Nancy?
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
President Joe has proposed 3 amendments to clarify and update our bylaws. This information is printed in the Newsette, so please read them and be prepared to vote on the changes at our next meeting in November. Thank you.
You can see they are here. This is just the 30-day formal notice is required by our bylaws. 2/3 of the members present in November will need to support these amendments for them to go into effect upon adoption.
Thanks.
Great.
Rose Gonzalez is not present today, but she did ask me just to make one announcement for healthy living checks. These are due by the end of the year. Again, there is an updated email on this. It will come out in your Newsette next month. It is not there right now, but if you want to jot it down quickly, rosegz53@gmail.com. Just a couple of really quick announcements. Our membership update as of today is 515 members. That's 18 since we met on September the 11th that we are up. A reminder for everyone who has not yet done so to renew their dues. In addition to that, please make it your goal to recruit members. We make it a personal goal to bring in at least 2 new members this next month. Again, your ARTA yearbook should have arrived in the mail in the past 2 weeks or so. And Anita Uphouse has asked us to, or asked me just to let everyone know that TRS has said their counselors will not be traveling to conduct in-person presentations during the year. The remainder of this year, they'll be doing them virtually. And so in-person presentations begin in January. What does this mean for ARTA? It means we need to let prospective retirees know this. We probably are not going to be able to have something as we've had in the past. So we've got to take it upon ourselves to let prospective retirees from this area know about these virtual counseling sessions and then getting them to join ARTA. Just a couple of more announcements. Again, continue to check the ARTA Facebook and the ARTA website. pages. Both Kevin and Marianne have done an excellent job in keeping these up to date. Marianne has also added a legislative tab, legislative info tab that's not reflected on this image, but you can find a lot of the different articles dealing with TRS and with the legislative positions on there. And again, forms for membership and for healthy living and for community volunteer service are located on our website. And again, thank you all for the work you've done. Laura Grayson.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
I want to be very brief because I know that we are running out of time. All of the information that you need on the AMBA dental and vision insurance, what the benefits provide, is in the newsette. I provided links and phone numbers. And then last night I was contacted by Gail Russell, who was, I think, briefly at our meeting and will be at the meeting in November. Gail is the representative for AMBA, and she will be at the meeting in November, probably to talk about what these benefits are and what they provide and how beneficial they are to us. Her number, should you wish to contact her before the November meeting, is 1-800, excuse me, I hope you have something to write with, 1-830-660-7755. And I'll provide that number for the newsette so that you can have it right there with you if you need to contact her. So the first slide here is on AMBA and what it provides. I won't read it to you. And our second slide is what Humana and AARP can provide for dental and vision insurance. Again, all of this information, numbers to call, websites to visit, is in the newsette. And you can do your own comparisons because choosing these insurance is a very personal thing. So I wouldn't want to make a recommendation and be wrong. But if you look at the numbers, you know what you can afford and you can make your own decisions. Thank you, Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Laura. Just an FYI, a heads up, next month on November 13th, Dr. Rosemary Morrow will be introducing Dr. Maggie Rivas Rodriguez, who is the founder of the Voices Oral History Project. She is a professor at the Moody College of Communication at UT. The other thing that I'm asking, again, we want to recognize our ARTA veterans. So if you are a veteran, please email me your military service history, any special recognitions given, a picture, preferably in uniform, but not required. By the 26th of October, I'd like to have a couple of PowerPoint slides honoring our veterans and including a longer detailed military record in our newsette for November. So please spread the word around. We'll send an email out as well in doing that. Now, just to conclude, this does mark 100 years for women's suffrage, the 19th Amendment. And when the Constitution was written, well over 50% of our populace was not enfranchised with the vote. And women struggled since 1848, roughly, to try to get the vote. An amendment went out in 1878 that did not pick up any traction until 1919. And 35 states were required to ratify this amendment, 36, excuse me, were required to ratify. 35 did it quickly, but it's bogged down at that point. Suffragists were wearing yellow roses to show support for the vote, red against. And it came down to the state of Tennessee, where the youngest member of the assembly came in wearing a red rose. He was 24-year-old Harry Byrne. And the night before the vote was taken, his mother, Feb, wrote him a letter. And she said, "Dear son, I hope you vote for hurrah and vote for suffrage. Don't keep them in doubt. I've been waiting to see how you stood, but I've not seen anything yet. Don't forget to be a good boy and help Mrs. Carrie Chapman Catt with her rats. She's the one that put rat in ratification. With lots of love, Mama." He went ahead and changed his vote, and ratification won by one vote on August 20, August 19th, 1920. And he said, I know that a mother's advice is always safest for her boy to follow. And my mother wanted me to vote for ratification. And with that, women got the vote in 1920. And so with that, I am going to adjourn this meeting at 11:48. And again, I'll leave the window open if anyone wants to stay and visit. And again, also remember Dame Vera Lynn's music as we head out. We'll meet again soon. So meeting adjourned.
No. Turn off the recording, please.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Turn off the recording now.
Doing it.
Thank you.